a wife has to decide what boundaries she's going to set in place. And this sounds strange between adults, but what consequences she's going to allow as well. Right. Because consequences can change a stubborn person's heart.
Right. Yeah. What you're telling me is in homes where maybe they don't feel safe or there's a lot of negativity and chaos and whatnot, is that they're going to their screens because a screen is safe. You and I don't think a screen is safe because there's some stuff that they could see on it and there's addictive natures, but it's safer than what in the kid's mind, not that they know this or understand it completely. Welcome to HomeWord. I'm Jim Burns, and so happy that you joined us today, and actually honored that you joined us. We have people joining from all over the world. It's just amazing to me that as we do this podcast, I think I said this before, but one of our major downloads is from Guatemala City. So, hola, mi amigos in Guatemala City. And we're just amazed that people from Jakarta, from all over the country, here in the United States and all over the world, join us on this podcast. So it's great to be with you. And listen, you're going to love this podcast. We're going to do the Ask the Expert practical questions on answers on a screen-saturated world with Dr. Alice Benton. We had Dr. Alice here before. She's one of my favorite people. I'll introduce her in a minute. But the interesting thing about it was I was telling Alice that it's one of the most downloaded podcasts. So I want you to go back to that podcast if you came on after we had this conversation. Her book is called Understanding and Loving Your Child in a Screen-Saturated World. And if you're looking at YouTube, then you get to see the deal, and you will get to see our beautiful faces. But if you're on listening how most people do, you won't get to see that. But anyway, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. She wrote it with Steve Arterburn. She knows her stuff. I'll just tell you that. She's one of my favorite people, like I said. And she's going to help us just answer questions today. Some of them are your questions. Some of them are questions that are in her book. And as I said, she's written this great book. But the thing about Alice is that she, again, is one of my favorite people because we together are on a show periodically called New Life Live. And it's a counseling show, and it's a question and answer show. She kills it. I write down notes from when Alice is giving people input, and she does it in such love and such empathy, and I just appreciate her so much. She, I call her brilliant behind her back. Maybe I should say it in front of her, but I just think she's awesome. She's married, has 3 children. Alice, welcome back to HomeWord.
Thank you. So good to be here again.
So we don't have many people do this. I need you as my resident Ask the Expert person. And I do have to say now that the people on the YouTube channel see you, I thought you were about 15 the first time I met you. And wait, she has 3 kids? She has a doctorate? I don't think so. But anyway, I just appreciate just your depth of knowledge, your understanding. You're a clinical psychologist. You specialize in Christian input. Even trauma is one of your expertise, and I just appreciate that so much. But again, we have this affinity to try to help families, and you do that so well, and all of the information on you is in our show notes, and I want people to go to those show notes and get to know Dr. Alice Benton. And so again, it's so great to have you. I want to jump in, and I just am going to ask questions. And these aren't questions where we're going to go dialogue necessarily about some of the content in your book. It'll come out. But people have a lot of questions. The most often requested seminar for HomeWord, we're the largest provider of parenting seminars in the U.S., is creating a media-safe home, learning about digital. And so no wonder these people have these questions. But the first question, I think it's a great question. At what age should I allow my child to have a cell phone? What do you think about that?
Well, I want parents to be braced for this answer because over 50% of 10-year-olds already own a smartphone.
Yeah. Wow.
And so most of us have already given our children a smartphone.
Right.
But research is showing us that it's much better if we wait, and here's the tough news, that we wait until high school and even later high school. Because children do better if they're able to get through puberty without having unlimited internet access. And that's really more of the problem than the phone itself. It's the smartphone internet access that becomes problematic.
Yeah, I mean, a smartphone is way too smart for any of us. I mean, in a smartphone, you just gave your kid access to the world. What do you think about families who, and I've been sharing this with some people, that with families, you don't give them their own cell phone, but a lot of parents, they're concerned about, they're going to be, at dance recital, at practice or something like that, text me when you're there. So this is the family phone. It doesn't have access to the internet. What do you think about that for, kids who are in that preteen level, if you would.
It's a much safer way to be able to stay in communication with our children.
Yeah.
And so I think having phones that do not have internet on them and that have parental controls are a much more convenient way to stay in touch with your children while protecting them from internet access.
Yeah. No.
But even so, I think children having phones is problematic in that it's too convenient and it takes away some of the independence building and some of the trust building that children should be doing through other avenues than just their own phone.
No, I know. I know. And Kathy and I will do this. Last night, our grandson was taken to the hospital because he had a stomach ache, and they found out it might be appendicitis. We don't know yet. By the time this airs, we'll know. And Kathy, I was thinking we were going to have some conversation, and Kathy is at the dinner table looking at all the things about getting your appendix removed and ages and all this. Well, it's so simple. I mean, I wasn't mad at her. I was just like, I wanted to know the information too, but it actually meant we ate dinner alone. Okay, well, we ate dinner with her cell phone. I'm not burning on her. I'm just simply saying that the access is so easy and crazy. And, that's a good thing. I'm glad we learned that. But yet, again, at the same time, it blocks relationships. The question I always ask is technology bringing your family together? Is it bringing your family apart? And you even say in your book, you talk about, if you're going to do technology on a digital device, maybe you do it together with kids and you watch a show or you play a game together. You see that as good.
I do.
Yeah.
Because like you're pointing out, loneliness is a big factor when families are in the same room but disconnected by their phones. And both children and spouses will talk about that loneliness. Someone referred to her husband's phone as the other woman just the other day.
Right.
And I know that feeling. I also asked my husband, he and my son were using the phone while we were watching a movie.
Right.
But it felt like they weren't with us.
Yes.
They were having inside jokes together. They were laughing about something we couldn't see.
Yeah.
And it removed them from the family environment.
No. I saw that one time. Our family was together, and two of the daughters, we have three, but two of the daughters, I could see that they were texting and they were getting a kick out of what they were texting about. So in my humble opinion, I go, it must be me. They're making fun of my hair. They're making fun of the shirt I'm wearing. They're making fun of something I said. Well, it wasn't about that at all. They were just having their own conversation in the midst of the family get together. And, they're adults, so it's not like I can, take their phone away. Now, it's interesting because you said, I'm shocked that when you said, that over half 10-year-olds, I'm not that shocked, but I am a little bit. So parents ask me this question all the time. I know they ask you this question. What do you do when your child says, but all of my friends have a phone? And the truth is over 50% of them probably do at that point. What's your answer to help to help a parent say, well, all your friends don't because you don't? Or, how do you say it? What do you do?
I start with validating. You're right. You're in a lonely spot.
Good, really.
And it's hard on you that you're the only one that doesn't. And you can talk to me about it. You can tell me that it upsets you, that I won't let you have a phone yet. And as long as you're talking to me respectfully, I can listen to you.
Yeah.
So we validate rather than trying to correct or argue about why they don't have a phone, at least initially.
Yeah.
And I find that if my child is asking combative questions, when I know he doesn't want the answer, he wants me to change my mind, then I'm not willing to explain my position because he's not going to receive it at that time.
No.
So I validate first, and then I'll say, if you really want to know why we're waiting, I will tell you at another time. But I know I can't tell him while he's in that angry frame of mind. When he's calmer, then I explain. It's for your protection. It's for your brain health. And Jim, what we're really finding out is that children have to be allowed to go through puberty without being so heavily linked to their phone.
Yes.
Because if during puberty, if girls have access to social media and boys have too much access to video games, that's when we see depression and anxiety rise.
Wow.
If the kids that have had phones since 2010 that grew up through puberty during that age, the depression and anxiety rates have skyrocketed over 100%.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And and I think a lot of that does have to do with social media too, because you're watching beautiful people on TikTok and tell you things that they're screaming a cultural norm for them that's different than even how we would teach our kids, and so our kids then listen to a YouTube influencer instead of really having dialogue with us. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Another question, I'm just digging down on these questions, is how much time is good time? I mean, when you're dealing with this, you're obviously saying don't give them their phone until later, but how much time once they're able to look at digital. And again, we call it phones, and a phone is a digital device. It's a computer that's connected to the world. But there's also, iPads and, computers and things like that. How much time is, harm in your mind to kids?
I think it really depends on what a family can tolerate. Because most children and adolescents, they're getting over 8 hours of digital entertainment time per day.
Incredible.
But research shows us that there's a real jump in the negative impact around the 1.5 to 2 hour mark of individual digital entertainment time per day. Yeah. So my family, once we were really starting to learn this research, we moved down to 2 hours because that's what my husband and I could tolerate. Right. We couldn't go lower than that yet. I think I could have, but my husband couldn't. Yeah. He's more of an enabler. He enjoys screens more than I do. I'm more of a limiter. Right. So we settled on 2 hours. Yeah. But then I was influenced by the research to say, I think we should go lower than this. I think we should try to move down to 1.5. So over the summer, we took another stretch of 2 hours with the decision that once school starts, we're going to lower it down to 1.5 hours. Yeah. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's a guideline. My husband's probably going to always let them watch a little bit more than that. I'm going to have my timer on. It's going to beep and annoy all of us. And I'm going to say, time's up. We did it. We did the 1.5 hours. Right. So it really is what's tolerable for your family. Yeah. But we know that moving it closer to around 2 hours or less is what's better for our children's
I so agree with you. So such good stuff. In fact, sometimes I suggest one. In fact, I'm going to talk about it at the end of this podcast. I'm going to take a little time and I'm going to talk through some of those hour things too. You brought up something, Alice. It's not in my notes, but I want to talk about it because I hear so many people. You said you're a limiter. Your husband is more of an enabler. And that's really normal, that we're not on the same page in parenting, period. When something as important as digital use, you are at a kind of a standstill because you see it one way, say he sees it the other. I hear that every week in my ministry, it feels like. What do you say to them? How do you, one person just can't roll over, or they can, but maybe they don't want to. So how do you do that? How do you now we're moving to marriage advice, but how do you do that? How do you make that happen?
I see a lot of male-female division in this. Yeah. I think in general, we females tend to be more of the limiters and males more of the enablers. Not always true, but often true. And what we need to do is, with humility, work to compromise. And we women have to be so cautious not to move into rigidity, because that's when arguments erupt, and our husbands will often dig their heels in and will be less willing to cooperate. Right. So starting off with, we're probably all having problematic screen use at some level, and we women are probably changing our stance from pre-children to now having children. Yeah. We were all probably more flexible when we were dating. I certainly was. Sure. So I actually chose to apologize to my husband to say, I'm changing the rules here. And I am much more cautious now that we have kids. So I'm sorry, because you married a woman who was more flexible. And now I'm less so, now that I know how it impacts our children. So first, would you forgive me that I'm switching things around here? Love it. And then would you please join me? Yeah. And so I needed to have a lot of patience to wait for my husband to be ready for some of the things that I was asking really for. No. And ladies, it helps if we ask for one thing at a time rather than asking for an entire overhaul. So I suggest prioritizing what our requests are. So maybe it's just the type of screen use, meaning the content of what we're consuming, that we move towards enriching content. Yeah. So my husband and I, we had to clean up some of the shows that we were watching. Yeah. We were watching some dark, scary shows that were entertaining for us as parents, but if we were going to hold a household standard, we needed to change what we were doing. It's really good. Maybe it's the family mealtime, that's where we're asking that our spouses don't use screens. No, I think it's really good. A lot of people will say, I'm a single mom, I'm a single dad, but typically it's single mom. And my husband, when they go to dad's house, my ex-husband, it's crazy. I mean, they can watch screens 8 hours. Heck, they can watch screens 12 hours if they want. And what's on the screen is not good. What do you say to that single mom who's like, I'm trying to monitor this. I'm trying to do it right. I'm trying to live out Christian values. And my ex is like, just letting it go. It's one of the most heartbreaking situations with this particular topic, because there's limited to no control over what your ex-spouse is doing. Right. And we know half of marriages end in divorce. So this is such a common situation to be facing. So really it is first surrendering control. and having to accept that God has to be with our children when they are out of our influence. And then it's still holding to our standards in the home, but bracing that our children will be upset with us because of how different the standards are in both homes.
Yeah.
And then we go back to the validation. It's more fun at Dad's house. I hear that. It's more enjoyable.
Yeah.
I do have tougher standards here.
Yeah.
And I have to do this for your safety and for your health long term.
Yeah. No, it's really, really good. I'm sure, listeners, that you want to just, can you call Alice and say, can you come to our house and can you help us work through these things because it's so good? And by the way, you can get all the information on Alice. And you know what? This kind of conversation can happen with a person like Alice. Here I am saying this, and we haven't really talked about it ahead of time, but I know that she speaks and she's a great communicator. And so if you want to consider having somebody, let's say you're at a church and you want to do something on understanding and loving your child in a screen-saturated world, which is the title of her book. You could connect with her and she just might be able to do that. And I find that those are some of the most important things that you who are in the church, we've got a lot of pastors and lay leaders and youth workers and things like that. That's maybe what we do. One of the ways we can help parents is, you can't bring her to the house, but you can bring her to the church, and she could do something like this. Listen, we're going to take a real quick break. When we come back, I want to ask Alice about GPS monitoring. It's another thing that people ask me all the time, and it's kind of confusing because, you don't want to tell mothers to read their kids' diary, which mothers did, and kids still, adult kids now resent that. But at the same time, there's a safety factor, and it's just real confusing. So I'm going to ask her that question when we come back. We'll be right back. Don't go away. More to come on HomeWord. Hi, Jim Burns here from HomeWord. There are so many great things happening at the HomeWord Ministries. And you know what? The greatest thing is my new friend, Marcus Preciado, who is our new president, an incredible leader with great vision. And he's going to tell you a little bit about some of the new things.
Thanks, Jim. Everyone, so excited about what God has for us here at HomeWord. And thank you for being a part of it as well. To give you a sneak peek of what's coming next year and beyond, we're going to be expanding our podcast team, bringing new voices and new faces. We're very excited about that as well. Also, HomeWord Hubs. We're going to have feet on the ground in every region of the United States so we can have hands-on ministry and take HomeWord to the nation, as well as establishing Project HomeWord, which is going to be a resource like no other to help families succeed. So thank you for being supportive. Thank you for being part of our community. And as this year is ending, I want to encourage you to pray about generosity and being a part of what HomeWord's doing, and we can partner together to help families succeed.
Welcome back. I'm Jim Burns. So happy you're here. Dr. Alice Benton with us. As I've told you, she's one of my favorites to be on this podcast, but just one of my favorites. And we do get to do this New Life Live show, and you should check that out. It's a great show. It's just people call in with all kinds of questions. We don't know what's coming next, and she kills it every time she's on. So anyway, it's so good. We're talking today about understanding and loving your child in a screen-saturated world. I suggest that you pick up a copy of this book. She wrote it with Steve Arterburn. And again, it's just so practical, as you can tell, so insightful. I mean, this is the kind of podcast that you want to send out to all of your friends because they need to hear this. It's such good content. Alice, I talked about GPS monitoring, like child's location, things like that. Children typically don't like that, and teens hate it. And I know people who even do it with their adult children. One guy I know, his son was, starting to experiment with heroin, and so he put a GPS thing on his phone, and so he knew where he was getting the drugs and everything. I'm not sure what you do with an adult child, but to be honest, it might have saved his life because there was kind of a confrontation, and there you go. I'm really curious to know what you think about GPS monitoring on a child's phone or on a child's device.
I know that in extreme situations, like your example, or a child is lost, it can certainly be helpful, and you'd be glad to have it.
Yeah.
In most everyday scenarios, I find it to be more problematic for families than not, especially for parents like me who tend to be more on the anxious side of things, who could easily be a helicopter parent. It can keep us obsessively tracking what our children are doing, which keeps us overly worried about them. And it can put our children in a position of being overly dependent on us, knowing where they are if they're also anxious children.
Right.
So I think it hampers the process of becoming independent. and building trust in other ways. If we
Interesting.
need to know where a child is, they can check in with us through other means, not just through GPS tracking.
Yeah.
So, of course, it can be helpful in some situations.
Yeah, what I hear you saying, I'm aware of another situation where this child was really doing major at-risk behaviors, and they ahead of time said, so we're putting a tracker on your phone, and we're not doing this. We won't do this forever, but we are really concerned about your actions, and just it's one of these crazy stories I won't get into. And you know what? That was another one where there was probably a positive reason to do it for a time, but not do it behind their back. To say, look, here's the new story. We're going to try this for 3 months, and we're going to see how it goes. I think sometimes that can work. Again, in those extreme. But I really like your answer on that. That's fascinating.
Jim, I'll add to it that I think we have become overly concerned about our children's physical safety in a time where crimes against children have actually dropped in the past 10 to 15 years.
Wow.
But crimes against children online have increased
Wow.
dramatically.
Wow.
So we should be more worried about their safety online than their safety off screen.
Yeah, boy, that's a great insight. You have all these great insights on this. Okay, so another almost drum roll, big question. What do you do when a child is addicted to their screen? I mean, I was speaking in Richmond, Virginia. There were 800 kids. I said, how many of you think it's possible to be addicted to social media? 800 kids put their hands up. Honestly, I didn't see one kid not put their hand up. And then I said, how many of you are addicted? All but 2. So there was 798 went, I'm addicted. And again, they're kids. So they're kind of looking around. All the other kids are putting their hands up. So maybe they did. But it's crazy. This, they even acknowledge that they're addicted to it.
Yeah, they'll be honest about it.
What do you do in a situation like that when you're seeing your child go down that road and it's not a good road to be down? I'm not saying they're all on pornography. I'm just saying that they're putting so much time and energy into it. I read where the average middle schooler is outside less than a prisoner.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
It's crazy. Oof. So, but what are they doing?
By their own choice, they're outside.
Yeah, they're not outside because they're using screen time. But how do you help a child who you really go, you know what, they are addicted?
I think we parents have to take a look at ourselves first, because if our child is addicted, it has to do with us. It's a family problem.
Right. Okay.
So first we have to check our own screen use, because 1 in 4 of us adults is already at a problematic level of screen use. What are we modeling? What are we allowing? And what are we enabling in our homes?
Yeah.
But I have found that in high tension homes, children are using screens as an emotional escape.
Interesting.
So if the home has high tension already, then I wouldn't be so quick to try to get my child off screen. The emotional tension from parents to children has to be addressed first, honestly, so that it's emotionally safe to come off screen.
Yeah, right.
Because some of them need that escape.
Yeah, what you're telling me is in homes where maybe they don't feel safe or there's a lot of negativity and chaos and whatnot, is that they're going to their screens because a screen is safe. You and I don't think a screen is safe because there's some stuff that they could see on it and there's addictive natures, but it's safer than what in the kid's mind. Not that they know this or understand it completely, but it's safer in their mind than having mom and dad yell at you or
yelling at each other.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
But then, of course, the child still has the addiction problem, so that also needs to be addressed. Right. So I say again, to start with humility, that I have been a part of this problem happening in our home because I'm probably the one paying for the screen that you're addicted to.
Yeah.
It's like providing the drugs to the addict.
Right.
I've been enabling it. But then these are the changes we both are going to make in order to help you limit your screen use. So I'm also going to limit mine. We're going to do this in a prayerful way because we probably need supernatural help to be able to break this. And then we're going to look at what consequences will be enacted. And you and I will decide that together. I'm going to take your opinion on it.
Right.
When I ask my son what his consequence should be, he almost always gives himself worse
I tell people
I
that
would.
In terms of just talking about discipline.
Yes.
Create it to get people support what they help you create and they'll go, well, I should be off the phone for, 2 months. Oh, no, honey. You know what? How about just 2 days? And they're going, Mom, you're awesome. Because they're putting more. Yeah, it's funny. Not always, but yeah.
But it can happen. It actually enhances relationship.
No, it's very funny.
So if we look at it as a family problem that the family needs to solve together, it tends to go much better. You may need to do a screen detox, though, to get over the initial part of the screen addiction.
What do you think of that? I mean, people are doing that today. They're saying the whole family's going to take a week screen detox or a day, or we're actually going to take a Sabbath and we don't do screens on a certain day or whatever. What do you think about that?
Yes, I've been practicing taking 24 hours off myself for months now. And as difficult as it was to start, it's now become a way to access more peace to be able to disconnect for that time. And I want to model to my children that I want them to do this too.
I really like that. Okay, so let's talk about pornography. Okay. And I actually am going to ask really two questions. One, I first want to talk about kids and pornography. We know that's a problem. We know that kids are seeing pornography at age 10 for boys, 11 for girls, now 11.8. I think I saw it on Google the other day. So the access to porn is everywhere. It's their first, oftentimes, look at what sexuality is. It's where they learn about sex now, because their parents, unfortunately, aren't talking to their kids about healthy sexuality. And so, they're looking at porn. What do you do when your child is caught looking at porn?
You're going to hear the same pattern from me, because we start with humility. And I think it really helps to start with the parental story of our own sexual imperfection or sexual immorality at an age-appropriate level, because it's so easy to point fingers to say our child is the problem. But we have to acknowledge that they were probably an innocent victim to start with. Yes. They were probably exposed by someone or something else.
Do you want to see so-and-so on YouTube with their top off for boys?
Yes.
It's there.
And of course, that's enticing.
Of course.
And there probably was a time that we as adults or in our own childhood, we accessed it too.
Yeah.
So to start off with, we all in our family, we're all vulnerable to this. And we parents have been imperfect in this area too. Yeah. But we know that something is going on with you and we have to talk about it. Yeah. And then we have to figure out together, just like the screen addiction, what we're going to do about this. Yeah. And I suggest family abstinence, where not necessarily with screens in particular, but certainly for the person that's having the problem. But not only am I going to limit your access to screens, but you're going to be able to choose from a number of things that I will abstain from, because I'm going to spiritually join you in this process to help us all access more grace, because this is difficult to overcome and we're all vulnerable to it.
I'll say something with people. I love that, by the way. I want to take you on the road and tell everybody this. For me, a lot of times I'll say, don't just restrict what you said, but restrict, but also say, you know what, now's the time for us to have the conversation. That's false sexual intimacy and lack of integrity. But here's what good sexuality is. And it's kind of the time when you begin having more conversations about, what's the master designer of our sexuality say about sex? Do you think you do both? Do you restrict and then make that a moment to say, you know what, so this is the time. I know you're only 9. We weren't going to have this conversation until a little bit later, but because of that, I think maybe it's a good idea for us to walk through at least some conversations about it. What do you think?
Not only do we have to do that, but we should front load. We have to talk with our children about sexuality much earlier than previous generations had to, because the exposure is happening so much younger.
No, the early sexualization of kids, and mainly through media, which is interesting, is something that is, a lot of experts are talking about these days. Very concerned about that. It's not just looking at porn, but just the sexualization that you see, on movies or even movies for kids. It could be a PG movie, so it's not like sexually oriented, but there's still the sexualization kind of shows up, and it's a tough thing. I mean, we could talk about that all day. Now, I want to talk about, and it's a question you get all the time, and I've heard you actually discuss this on New Life Live. My spouse is addicted to porn. What do I do? What do you say to that person?
First, we need social support, because it's so difficult to face those conversations with our spouse. And so accessing the roadmap of how to address this problem, because there is a well-worn path to the treatment and the healing and the recovery of it. Yeah. And that's what New Life specializes in. New Life Live specializes in. So having a community of people who can help support you address this with your spouse, but then we have to face it head on.
Right.
And so it's usually asking our spouse, are you willing to talk about this? And are you willing to get the help to make the changes? Yeah. And so sometimes people are able to stop cold turkey, but most of us are not. No. Most of us need either therapeutic help or group support. Sex Addicts Anonymous is a great group that helps with this. Yeah. And we need to do this, again, for the sake of modeling for our children.
Yeah. No, I think so too. And what do I want to take it one step further. I've heard you talk about this on the air, but the woman says, so my husband's addicted to porn. We don't have a good relationship. It's not going well. I feel very vulnerable with this. And my husband says he's not willing to change. What do you say?
If a husband is not willing to change, then a wife has to decide what boundaries she's going to set in place. And this sounds strange between adults, but what consequences she's going to allow as well. Because consequences can change a stubborn person's heart.
Right.
And so she's probably going to have to distance herself and allow a scaffolding of distance, which means I can't trust you while you're not willing to get help.
Right.
And so I'm gonna have to remove myself from our relationship at different levels if you will not get help and until you do get help.
Right.
And I'm going to be going to therapy to figure out what to do about this so that I have the support too, as long as you're unwilling. And at the other levels we sometimes have to take it to. Sometimes you have to take it to the level of, I can't even be sexually active with my own spouse until you get help with this. Because even though you might say it's just pornography, that's still infidelity. And I can't share my body with you until you're willing to clean this area of your life up.
That's really, really great. Now, the one thing I love about the podcast is we have conversations like this. The other thing I hate about the podcast is it goes too quick. What's a question that I didn't ask you that you get asked all the time? Again, your book and content is amazing. Understanding and loving your child in a screen-saturated world. What's another question? What did I miss in terms of the question?
A lot of parents will say to me, "We've already messed up. Are we too far gone?"
Yeah,
and if so, is there anything that we can do about it? I don't think we're ever too far gone in this, because there's still always a chance to say to our children, you know, we didn't have the right information. We made some mistakes. And so we're going to have a redo. We actually got a family phone for our children. It was a pinwheel phone. There was parental control, all of that. But we decided we did this too early. We don't need this. This is an unnecessary luxury. And so we're going to pull it back.
Yeah.
And so we apologized to our children.
Yeah.
And we validated for them how frustrated they were that we took it away from them. But we said, this is not the right time for our family to have this. So we're going to remove it. Yeah. We gave them a little forewarning. We're going to be done in a week, but then we're going to be done with this phone. And so it is not too late to admit to your children, I have some new information. I think I've made a mistake on this. And so we're going to be changing a few things.
That's just good parenting. That is good parenting. And I'm sure your kids said, thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. You're amazing.
I have not heard that from them yet on this topic.
By the way, since my kids are older than your kids by far, my kids are starting to say that. And I'm like, because we were the most conservative parents. We had boundaries. We did this. And we can't believe, everybody does this. And, now they're kind of going, you know what? You guys were a lot better than we thought, and I just laughed. The one who is the worst, who actually has a master's in clinical psych, but she said just recently, you guys are like legends with, as parents. So I'm like, that's not what you said when you were 17. And she's just started busting up laughing. So good job. Great input. Oh, time went by so fast. Thank you so much, Alice. And again, I want to recommend to all of you, pick up her book, Understanding and Loving Your Child in a Screen-Saturated World. And you know what? Listen to the other episode that we did and we'll have the episode number in our podcast notes, because if you didn't, you just got an incredible conversation. I mean, there isn't a person who walked off of this podcast because there's just so much great information. In fact, Elijah, I'm trying to figure out how we could when I go do creating a media safe home, I need to just have a QR code and say, well, now that you've heard me, listen to this podcast with Alice, because it's just so good. Hey, before you go, I want to make a couple of comments myself about it. Because I just see this as such a critical issue for parents. And what I kind of want to talk through is media use guidelines for families. And actually, it's just what she said. I'm just going to kind of almost reiterate it. Pretty much what's happening is I'm doing research in this area is if you're the parent of a 2 or under, you really have to really limited use with that. What happens is we use sometimes the cell phone or we use a digital device as the babysitter. And so they learn how to self-soothe 0 to 2. They don't know what's going on, but they learn how to self-soothe, and they're going to have to figure out how to do that in a different way. So I'm saying very limited use, and I'm just so sorry because I know life gets chaotic, life gets busy, and it works. We were on a trip not that long ago with our grandson, Huxley, and he was crying, and he was just in a really fussy mood. And there was a driver taking us someplace, and the driver put in a show, And all of a sudden he went from crying to, and he was perfect. So I get sometimes when you're in desperation, you got to put Thomas the Train on at a dinner when they're having an adult dinner and the kids are like going crazy. But I think we have to be very, very careful. So again, we're suggesting at HomeWord, severely limit. 2 to 5. She said it really well. I don't think they get to see much more than an hour. And even then, you're monitoring what they're seeing because, again, children have to learn how to soothe themselves. And a lot of times, self-soothing, learning those, that's a process. You learn it. It doesn't just come naturally. But when you're soothing yourself by always going to the screen, then that becomes quite addictive behavior, okay, as actually Alice was saying. So, yeah, watch the shows with them. Avoid media that is just, still trashy. And I'm not talking about trashy. I hope you're not allowing your kids to see that. But, just things that aren't going to build them up. Young kids don't learn well on screens. As they get older, it's not as bad. Kids who are in high school are going to learn on screens because that's how they do it today. But again, younger, not so much. 6 to 11, I'm still saying limit it to an hour. I think Alice mentioned up to 2 hours. But don't go over that. We tend to allow too much screen time because it actually kind of helps us. Okay, we're busy. Life's chaotic. There's all kinds of things going on in here. Watch this. Last night, our son-in-law had to bring our 6-year-old Charlotte to us, and she stayed overnight because of a hospital thing. And Charlotte, the first thing she said when she walked in, she said, "Dad, it's time for bed." She's in her pajamas. We need to get this kid to bed. It's late because of this emergency with her brother. And the first thing she said was, "Daddy said that Papa J, you would let me watch VeggieTales on the screen." And I was like, "Oh, geez." So do I go with Dad? Dad was just trying to I'm not throwing him under the bus. He's a great dad, or what do I do? And so you know what? I distracted her, and she got a book. Actually a storybook on the Bible, and she was fine with it, Alice. But at the same time, I think she just missed it. But again, we have to limit screen times. When they live in the house, know what's going on, have safe zones where it's not happening. I suggest that you don't let them have their screens in bed. Mm-hmm. You know what? There's this amazing thing called an alarm clock. So for $10, go on Amazon, buy the alarm clock because everybody says, well, the phone is my alarm clock. So move the phone. Dock it at a certain time within the family. And here's the question. Is technology bringing my family closer together, or is it driving technology farther apart? So anyway, just some thoughts kind of to add to what Dr. Alice Benton said. Dr. Alice, thank you so much today.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're honestly the greatest. Thanks for listening today to HomeWord, and thanks for watching it on the YouTube channel. If you do, subscribe, let others know. This is the conversation that all of your friends probably need to hear, and so send it out to them. Let them know about what's going on. We love that you're a part of this podcast, but we also love having even more people listen to the podcast, and so you are the ones who get the word out for us. So until next time, I'm Jim Burns, and you're listening to HomeWord.